It is a big moment. I think what our new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said a few weeks ago is the key. We are in a multipolar world. I think recognizing that is the first order of us all staying alive to avoid the risks of nuclear war. President Trump said several times that his greatest concern is to avoid World War III. I say bravo on that because we had a lot of neglect of that obvious point for many, many years. So we are in a multipolar world. China is powerful. Russia is powerful. The United States is powerful. If Europe gets its act together, which I hope it does, Europe can be powerful. India will be a great power. That's a reality. Now it's a matter of these great powers not blowing each other up, not getting into a direct war, and also making sure that the rules of the game don't abuse the rest of the world. This is feasible. I think we're on a more realistic course now than we were actually just a few weeks ago.
Do you think we're going to get a peace deal in Ukraine led by Donald Trump? And if so, how do you think this settlement will look?
Well, we know how the settlement will look when it comes, and you can look it up online. There was an April 15th, 2022 draft agreement nearly signed by Ukraine and Russia. If you reread it, as I've done several times in the last few days, it's a good agreement. There were a few details left to be concluded, but basically it was fine. But the United States and UK talked Ukraine out of the agreement, said continue to fight, don't accept neutrality. And unfortunately, since that bad advice, till today, about 1 million Ukrainians have lost their lives or have been gravely wounded. It wasn't good advice. So we know what the agreement will look like. It was already just about agreed.
And so for those who are not up to speed with that 2022 memorandum, how would you summarize it?
Yeah, the agreement was that Ukraine would be neutral, that there would be security guarantees involving all of the great powers, including Russia, which I interpret and would recommend should be through the UN Security Council. There was an annexed map which showed what the territorial lines would be, and this was at the verge of being signed. This, I think, is the basis of an agreement, which is end the war, end the bloodshed, end the destruction. The longer it goes on, the worse for Ukraine. I said that 2 years ago, that any delay meant more loss of life, more devastation. Ukraine would not win on the battlefield, and that's true. Now, Donald Trump is basically saying, look, Biden played poker. He bluffed quite a bit. He thought that the U.S. economic sanctions would bring the Russian economy to its knees. Nope. He thought that the ATACMS and the HIMARS would bring Russia to defeat. He thought that unrest inside Russia would prevent Russia from mobilizing. No, it was a poker game. Trump is saying, I don't want to hold the losing hand. We shouldn't hold the losing hand. And Ukraine only suffers from more poker with a bad hand. Now, Zelensky may be trapped by extremists around him who threaten him maybe with his life or whatever if he makes any concessions. But he says until today, well, there can't be any peace other than the full restoration of Ukraine's territory up to the borders of 1991. It's impossible. It was impossible then. It was impossible in the context of the Maidan coup. It was impossible for anybody who has followed events closely from then till now. And yet Zelensky continues to maintain what is an utterly impossible, literally impossible condition, because if we tried to implement that, well, either Russia would win everything or it would lose and then it would escalate. to nuclear war.
But doesn't he have to, in a
very-
way, doesn't Zelensky have to maintain that public position? He can't be seen at the moment, before they've even got round the negotiating table, to be just ceding Ukrainian territory, right? I mean, no leader in that position
would. I would just
would.
remind everybody that there were already the negotiations that brought this war nearly to a close 2 years ago. They were real negotiations. I went to Turkey to speak with the negotiators. I've spoken in detail with the negotiators. There was a negotiated end to the war. The United States and UK stopped it. And that's not controversial. That's just how it is, how it's been explained by everybody.
Well, Boris
involved.
Johnson was actually on my show last week and emphatically denied that he was the instigator for Ukraine continuing to fight. He said they wanted to continue
I don't know if he's
fighting.
the instigator. Maybe I don't think he was the instigator. I think the US was the instigator, but I think he was the messenger.
The assumption would be then that they freeze on the current lines, the 20% that Russia's now occupying of Ukraine, they would keep, albeit, I assume, with no transfer of sovereignty, because Ukraine wouldn't agree to that. That Ukraine would not.
No. I first of all, we can't negotiate. This is.
No, I'm asking you what you think is most likely.
Right. What I think should be done is a permanent peace, not a ceasefire or an armistice line. I don't want to revisit this war and have irredentist sentiments and lobbying for a renewed war and new military buildups and all the rest. I want peace. There should be peace. Ukraine's mistake, but by the way, it wasn't Ukraine's mistake. It was an American project that we've discussed that goes back to 1994, was to push NATO all the way to Ukraine. And that crossed Russia's understandable national security red line. And I would have respected Russia's national security red line because I felt that if you violated it, we would get to where we are today. So I would aim for peace, not a settlement that is grudging, imposed. We never will accept the sovereignty of Russia. What kind of peace is that? All of that is just a prelude to the next war. We should have real peace. By the way, there are three groups of people that are involved or should be involved. They're the generals. They know something about fighting, sometimes well or sometimes badly. They're the politicians. They know something about grandstanding. But then there are the diplomats. The diplomats should work out a real settlement. And while it's not very popular to say, I'm going to say it, the United Nations Security Council should be the ultimate place where that arrangement is settled, including China, including Russia, including Britain, France, the United States, all as co-guarantors of a true peace. Not an armistice line, not a frozen conflict, not something that Ukraine never accepts. No, an end to this war, because we have more important things to do on the planet than have a future in which the question of Lugansk and Donetsk play a central role in somebody's politics.
There are people like Elon Musk calling for America to withdraw from NATO. Just quickly, what is your response to that?
It will happen if there is no settlement of this war. If Europe says, well, I'm all in favor, by the way, of Europe getting its act together. And I was in the European Parliament saying this just very recently.
I agree.
But if Europe says we fight until 1991 borders are restored, the United States will wash its hands of all of this. I can tell you, they will not play a losing hand. They started this, by the way. The U.S. started this. The U.S. said we can go wherever we want. Big Brzezinski laid it all out in 1997 as clearly and explicitly as one can do. So the United States started it, but the U.S. drops countries like hot potatoes. That's my whole life, whether it's Vietnam or Afghanistan, now Ukraine. So if the Europeans push so hard of Zelensky, because for whatever reason, as an individual, says what is not in the interest of his country, it could be pretty bad for the relations between Europe and the United States. I would not recommend that at all.